Part 5 of our videos on evolution deals with the evidence of evolution, and this is basically the point that biological evidence is supported by scientific evidence from many different disciplines, including mathematics. We have geological evidence. We can look at rocks and we can use radiometric dating where we're able to date geological formations and fossils. And what this has done for us is establish a chronological history of Earth and also giving us a general gauge for the age of the Earth, which we estimate to be about 4.5 billion years old. The fossil record also provides us with snapshots of the past, and when we put all of the different pieces together, we're able to see the sort of pattern of evolutionary change over these past 4 billion years. There might be places where things are missing or slightly unclear, but if we look at the evidence, we can see pretty distinctly that life is old and has changed over time. We can look at transitional fossils, and this is fossils or organisms that show the intermediate states between an ancestral form and that of its descendants. There are a bunch of different examples of transitional forms of fossils in the record, including this one here, the Tiktaalik. So we are able to see between groups of different animals the evolutionary progression. Also, evolutionary theory predicts that organisms will share similarities that are derived from common ancestors. And one of the things we can see when we look at fossils is that there are living organisms currently that resemble fossilized form. When we see those types of things, similar characteristics, we would say that these are due to homologies. And there's a lot of different types of homologies, but in general, homologies can be revealed by comparing the anatomies of different things and looking at the cellular similarities and differences. You can look at embryological development and look at vestigial structures. All of these things are considered homologies. One type of homology is anatomical homology, and these are similarities and differences in the anatomy of organisms. You have vestigial structures as one example. Structures that have lost primary adaptive purpose. You've got an example being the whale hind limbs. There are several animals, including pigs, cattle, deer, dogs, that all have these reduced non-functional digits that are often referred to as dew claws. These are best explained as vestigial structures, where they are remnants of ancestors with larger numbers of functional digits. Another way to think of a vestigial structure is a feature that an organism has inherited from its ancestor, but now is less elaborate and functional than it was in the ancestor. Usually vestigial structures are formed when a lineage has experienced a different set of selective pressures than its ancestors, and selection to maintain the elaboration and function of that feature ends or is greatly reduced. Your homologous structures are structures that are present in a common ancestor which have diverged during evolution. The best example is the vertebrate limb. You can see the characteristics of the vertebrate limb are similar amongst all vertebrates. They all have the 1 bone, 2 bone digits. Whale and hummingbirds all have tetrapod skeletons that are inherited from a common ancestor. Their bodies have been modified and parts have been lost through natural selection, resulting in adaptation to their respective lifestyles over millions of years. On the surface, the animals look different, but the relationship between them is easy to demonstrate. Except for the bones that have been lost over time, nearly every bone in each corresponds or has an equivalent bone in the other. And this is, again, the idea of the 1 bone, 2 bone digits. Analogous structures are different from homologous structures. These are structures that have evolved multiple times in different lineages to fill similar adaptive needs. An example is wings. You can have the wings of a butterfly or the wings of a bird. These are not the same in structure, but the wings have developed both so that animals can fly, so be able to fit similar adaptive needs. The chemical evidence is probably some of the best evidence out there. This is the idea that all living things are fundamentally alike. If we were to look at the cellular and molecular level, living things are remarkably similar to each other. These fundamental similarities are most easily explained by the evolutionary theory idea that life shares a common ancestor. So, different species might share genetic homologies as well as anatomical ones. This one I like, this example. Roundworms, they share 25% of their genes with humans. The genes might be slightly different, but the similarities nonetheless suggest the idea that there might be some common ancestry. The fact that DNA codes itself is a homology that links all life on Earth to a common ancestor. The idea that DNA and RNA both possess a simple 4-base code that provides a recipe for all living things. In some cases, if we were to transfer genetic material from the cell of one living thing to a cell of another living thing, the recipient would follow the new instructions as if it were their own. So the chemical evidence, the similarities between cellular structure, DNA structure, the chemical pathways, all of that is a really clear example that life shares a common ancestor. And we're able to use this chemical evidence to establish the relatedness between organisms, and we call that phylogeny of all things on Earth. And so here we have an example of a phylogeny of all living things on Earth. The last thing I mentioned at the beginning, that the evidence for evolution also includes some mathematical processes. There's been computational analysis that have been done to look at large amounts of chemical sequence data in order to establish those large phylogenies, and also the Hardy-Weinberg theory, which is something that we will learn separately in class. And the Hardy-Weinberg theory, the real point of it is to quantify the amount of evolutionary change that exists from generation to generation. And that ends part 5.